Okay, welcome to anatomy class. We're going to go through a review. We're going to start with a review of all the bones, full skeleton. So to start with this, we'll start with the skull, which of course I left the one skull I wanted to use. Hey, can we get the colored skull, please? We'll start with the colored skull, because this one's going to definitely be on the test. And we'll start with sutures. We have a coronal suture, goes across the top, follows the coronal plane. We have a sagittal suture, front to back, right here, follows the sagittal plane. We have a lambdoid suture, right here across the back between the occipital bone, and squamous sutures here around the temporal bone. Then, bones of the cranium. We got a frontal bone, big yellow thing right here. We got a frontal squama, it's a big part here. Now, there are some supraorbital foramen. They're little holes that are just above the eye socket, supraorbital foramen. That's in the frontal bone. We have the parietal bones on the side of the skull. Then we have the temporal bones. We'll look at this brown temporal bone because the other side, brown temporal bone, is kind of busted. So we're going to look at this one. We got the zygomatic process. This is the part that sticks out here attached to the zygomatic bone. So the zygomatic process is part of the temporal bone, becomes part of the attached part of the zygomatic bone right here. Then we have down here this little pointy thing that looks like a pencil, styloid process. Behind it is the mastoid process. Now here, right where the mandible pops in, this little groove where the mandible attaches, is the mandibular fossa. Then we have some canals. We've got a carotid canal and a jugular foramen. And it's basically showing as a little groove right back here. The model's not perfect because there's a big gaping hole in the model, but it's right there. Then, in between the styloid process and mastoid process is a little foramen called the stylomastoid foramen. And that's the parts of the temporal bone. So we'll flip to the occipital bone since we have the little thing upside down right now. We have the occipital bone. We have the occipital condyles. These rest on the spine. And then we have a huge honking hole. Its name is huge honking hole. In Latin it's called the foramen magnum, which from Latin means huge honking hole. It's the foramen magnum. Okay, then we'll flip it up here to the sphenoid bone. Now, if we take a look in here, the sphenoid bone, it's this red bone in here, back of the eye socket. We've got the optical foramen, also known as the optical canal. I stabbed it right there with the probe. Then we flip it upside down. Well, actually, we're going to flip it upside down. You see these wing-shaped things sticking down from it. Those are pterygoid processes. They look like wings sticking down. And we have the sella turcica, which we'll point to in this model. It's this saddle-like thing. It's saddle-like. And while we're on this one, we're going to do the ethmoid bone. We've got the crystal galley. This one's called the coxcomb. It's right there. And we've got the cribriform plate. Cribriform plate has a lot of the nerves, the olfactory nerves going through them, and has the olfactory bulb laying across the top of it. And while we're talking about the ethmoid bone, we're going to take a look at it up here in the nose. See how these yellow things? These are the conchae. And then down the center is a perpendicular plate. Not so good on this model, but it's there. And that's the ethmoid bone. Then we have the zygomatic bones. Once again, that's yellow. Now, it's got this process that sticks out towards the temporal bone. Now, of course, because we like snazzy naming, this process that goes to the temporal bone is the temporal process. Notice the temporal process touches the zygomatic process. The two of them come together. We have the lacrimal bones. The only model we will use lacrimal bones on for the test is this one, because the only way we can really see it is it's painted orange. It's orange. That's lacrimal bones. And then there's the lacrimal canal. I stabbed the lacrimal canal, you can find that. Your tears drain from your eyes down into your nasal cavity with those. Alright, nasal bones, big white things up in the front. Then we have sinuses, which we'll move to the sliced brain model right here. We got some sinuses. We got the frontal sinuses, right up here in the frontal bone. Guess what? Sinuses are named based upon what bone they're in. Frontal bone has frontal sinuses. We go over here to the ethmoid bone, has ethmoid sinuses. Notice how it looks kind of like a sponge. Behind the ethmoid bone is the sphenoid bone. We got a sphenoid sinus. And then lastly, we have the maxillary sinus here to the sides. And that's the maxilla. So, those are the sinuses. Now we'll talk a few more minor bones of the face. Okay, we've got the vomer. Notice, it's this yellow one that kind of sticks out like a tongue in the nose. If I'm going to ask the vomer, it's probably going to be this one, because it's really obvious and pretty direct. Then, we've got the palatine bones. We'll pull the jaw out, we'll take a look. See these red ones in the back? That's right there in the back, those are the palatine bones. And while we got this thing upside down, let's look at the maxilla. We've got a couple things. We've got the infraorbital fossa, the infraorbital foramen. It's a hole right here underneath the orbit, or underneath the eye. Infraorbital foramen. Then we have the alveolar process, that's where your teeth are attached. Alveolar process, right here, the process where your teeth are attached. We have the palatine process. It's this part that attaches to the palatine bones. So on the roof of the mouth. And then we have the incisive foramen. It's a hole right there. Right behind the incisors, a little hole right there into the maxilla. Then we got the mandible, which I just happen to have pulled out right here. That one out of the way. Okay, mandible. Mandibular condyle. It's where it attaches to the temporal bone. We've got the coronoid process right up here. It's right there. Then we have mental protuberance, the chin. Really smart people sit there, rub their chin. That's the mental. Oh yeah, smart people rub their chin. Yeah, they try to act all smart. That's the mental. Got to remember that mental process, mental protuberance. Sorry. And then we have the mental foramen. There are little holes right there on the chin. And then we have. They also have an alveolar process. This is the part where the teeth attach. Alveolar process. Same thing in the maxilla. This is just the alveolar process of the mandible. And then we have the mandibular foramen. It's a hole right here in the mandible. Right inside the jaw. And the last part of the skull that we actually isn't part of the skull, but we have it anyways, is the hyoid bone. Which, of course, the skeleton I have does not have a hyoid bone on it. It's the little bone that sticks out right here. Guess what? We have two skeletons with a little bone that sticks out right there. We're going to zoom in on that skeleton right there.